Hello, British history fans. I'm Dr. Carol Matthews, and welcome back to the Old Manor House. This is my new YouTube channel, and if you saw the first video, you will know that this channel is basically a journal, a video journal of my setting up my new history-based project called the Old Manor House, in which we can explore British history as we explore a fictional old manor house located somewhere in the English countryside, as it's seen, history as it's seen through the sort of lens of that house and the eyes of the people who've lived and worked in the house. Now, this is something I am so excited about, and I wanted to share it with everybody, so hence the YouTube channel. But it also got me thinking, well, I'm setting up a house, about how I actually got interested in history. And I would like in this video to ask you the question of how you got interested in history. What was it about British history that first sparked your interest? And I'll ask you that again in a moment, but I think it's probably important that, because I'm setting up a house, that I explain to you how the role of the English manor house or the country estate played a role in my interest in British history. I was a child of about 7, possibly 8, but probably about 7, when my grandmother took me to a huge country house in the southeast of England near where we lived, called Manor House. And the only thing I can remember about that tour is one particular moment. Now, as a bit of background to that, we had literally just been studying Henry VIII and his 6 wives at school. And I'd been particularly struck by the story of Anne Boleyn and this sort of terrifying king that she'd married. And he didn't seem terrifying at the beginning when he was young and athletic, etc., and romantic. But as he got older, we all know that he became this sort of terrifying man who executed some of his wives. And so in my mind was this image of this huge, terrifying, frightful man in the famous portrait that we see with him standing like this. And the story of poor Anne Boleyn, as I saw her at the time, who later on lost her head. Now, the tour guide took us through Manor House, and literally the only thing, as I said, I can remember is this one moment. We were standing in a bedroom which was sumptuously furnished. In the middle of the room was an enormous, heavily carved, very old 4-poster bed with rich red hangings and the curtains around it. And we stood in a room. I had my back to a fireplace, and there was a mantelpiece on the fireplace, and the door was on my right. So we'd all filed into the door and stood along this wall, and I was standing with my back to the fire. And then on the other corner, sort of in the far left corner of the room, was one of those really old, small, mullioned windows. And I remember the tour guide actually pointing to this bed, and this is literally the only moment I remember. She pointed to this bed and she said, now when Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn were married, they visited Manor House and they stayed in this room. And she gestured to the bed and she said, and they slept in this bed. Now at 7, suddenly I went, suddenly Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn weren't just figures in history. Suddenly they were real people. They'd been in this room. And in my mind's eye, I could literally see, I imagined Henry VIII sort of striding in that door and across the very floorboards in front of me, and crossing the room and going to the window and kind of looking out the window. And suddenly he was very real. And Anne Boleyn, who was a real woman who had really had her head chopped off by this huge, monstrous man. And I became aware in that moment of a clock ticking behind me on the mantelpiece. And I remember thinking, I'd been really struck by the thought that these were real people and they'd been in this room and they'd walked these floorboards and they'd slept in that bed and looked out of that window, the same view I could see, the same floorboards they'd walked. It was the same room, essentially, and all that was separating me from being in the room with Henry VIII was the clock ticking behind me, was time. That was all. And what is time? It's just a clock ticking. And that thought has stayed with me all these years. And really, although I didn't end up studying Henry VIII, strangely enough, I ended up studying the 18th century rather than the 16th. But that moment was when history came to life for me. And it wasn't just kings and queens and dates and battles. It was about real people. And from that moment, I really wanted to try somehow to connect with these people, to understand them and to understand the world they lived in, and to maybe get an idea of what my life would have been like if I'd lived in that period as well. There's a lot about, we're very different people and the world is very different now to the way it was in the 16th and the 18th centuries. But there's also something that we have in common. There's also something about a human experience of what it is just to be alive. In many ways, we are very different to our ancestors. In some ways, we are very much the same. We all want the same things. We all have the same passions, the same fears. It's just the world we live in and the culture we live in is very different. So how does that change us, or does it change us? How much are we different to them, really? So that is the moment that, for me, within the setting of an old manor house, I got interested in history, and it sparked something in me that has kept me interested in history ever since. Now, the purpose of this video, as I mentioned at the start, was to ask you how you got interested in British history. What was it that sparked an interest for you? Was it a place? Was it perhaps a story or a person? Is it someone's personality who's captured your interest? Is it the culture, the fashion, the literature of the time? What is it that first got you interested in history? I would love to know. And I would love it if you would put your answer in the comments below and let me know why you were interested in history. What was that moment that sparked an interest for you? So let me know, and if you like this video and you like the sound of following me on my journey as I set up my fictional manor house and its story and the stories of the people who lived and worked in it, and perhaps if you would like later on to sign up and come join me as the fictional curator of the house and explore British history from the perspective of this one house and the family and people who lived and worked in it. So if you'd like to do that, please do subscribe to the channel, and you may also like to join my Facebook group, my free Facebook group, which is called Great British History, and I will drop the link below here. But please do let me know what you think first fascinated you about British history. And I'll see you next Thursday. Bye for now.